I'm literally thinking like, this camera is an absolute beast. And if this gets Netflix approved, like, I wouldn't be surprised. 4K, 120, it's got Cine EI, it's got pretty much absolutely everything the FX3 has, but an APS-C sensor. But it does have that clear image zoom because it's an oversampled 4K footage. So you're gonna get real crisp, clear image zoom. Oh man, I love this thing. I love it. Obviously, the sensor readout isn't as fast as the FX3, but it is pretty damn close, and it's much better than your A7 IV, so. You're doing some good things, Sony. You're doing some good things. So today's gonna be an interesting video because I know there's gonna be a whole bunch of content creators out there creating about the Sony FX30. Now, this is the newest, greatest APS-C camera in the Cine line. So it's a Super 35 sensor and it takes incredible videos. It's gonna pair well with my FX6. And yes, I did actually get to test it as well. And I've got a lot of information to unpack in this video, but I am actually gonna be spreading this out in probably about 4 videos. So make sure you subscribe, be tuned for that because they've got so much information to cover. Low light, rolling shutter, image quality when it comes to 4K, slow motion, all those kind of things. But we're gonna be diving into what the FX30 is all about and why you'll probably actually buy one. I'm guaranteeing you're probably going to buy one. This one is gonna sell like hotcakes. It's incredible. I'm gonna put the FX6 down. Like, this is my small FX6 when it comes to, you know, throwing this on a gimbal. Now that the FX30's here, it's gonna be gimbal compatible like that. I cannot wait. I tried to do as much hands-on, real-world stuff. So I organized 3 separate shoots when this came, and it was incredible, and I cannot wait to share the results. You're going to absolutely love it. There's some pros, there are a couple of cons, but we're gonna be talking about that. But today, let's talk about some of the specs that it has dropped. It's a Super 35 sensor, so it's an APS-C size sensor, but obviously if you do film, it's a Super 35. In video mode, it's about 20 megapixels, which is about twice the size of the FX3 sensor. The FX3 is about a 12 megapixel sensor in the full frame, but when you actually start filming in 16:9, it's about 10 megapixels. Now this one is exciting because it is an oversampled 6K image that obviously downsamples it to 4K. So you're gonna get much crispier looking footage, just like the A7 IV. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I purchased the A7 IV, because I wanted a different look. I didn't want a B camera that's exactly the same as my FX6. I wanted a different option. If a client wanted some really high, crisp looking footage, the A7 IV is it. But that's why the FX30 has come out, and that's going to be an incredible camera if you want those really nice detailed looking footage. Now it also does real-time tracking, just like all the other Sony cameras. The autofocus is incredible in Sony cameras. Like, I feel like Sony is leading the way when it comes to autofocus. It's amazing. Now this is probably the best part. It has 4K at 120 frames per second. No crop. Sure, it's an APS-C crop already, but when you're filming, there's no additional crop on top. But it does have breathing compensation. With the FX3 does not have breathing compensation. The FX6 does, the A7 IV does, and the FX30 has breathing compensation. So that does crop in a little bit and, you know, accounts for a lot of that breathing that's in some of the G Master and Sony lenses as well, which is great. And there could be an additional crop if you use active stabilization. So it does have the same IBIS and active stabilization as it does in the FX3, the A7S III, and the A7 IV, which is great. It's really good, trust me. I absolutely love it. Now, in terms of the other specs, it's very similar to the FX3. It has, you know, you can load up 16 user LUTs, which is great. It's got S-Cinetone, it's got Cine EI mode now, and that new menu system that the FX3 has, which, you know, is great. You're offering all these pro features in a camera that is, yes, is significantly less on the price. Now, the biggest difference between the FX3 and the FX30 is that sensor. It obviously is an APS-C size sensor, but it has a dual base of 800 and 2500. So it's not as sensitive as the FX3. Now the FX3 has 800 and 12,800 in cine EI mode. Now that's, makes it an absolute low light beast. Now I love using the FX6 because low light, it just crushes it. But the FX30 performs really good in low light situations, and we're actually going to be doing a completely separate video with low light, so be sure to tune in for that one. Now there are a couple of other different features with the FX30 that's the FX3 doesn't have. Like I said, it's got breathing compensation, but it's also got the focus mapping that's in the new A7 IV. Now that is really good when it comes to critical focus, and if you just got a regular product sitting there and you're doing a whole bunch of manual focusing, focus mapping is a really good feature that I use pretty much all the time, because when I'm doing top-down shots, I need to make sure everything is completely in focus in the correct spot. Focus peaking can only do so much. It gives you pretty much a range of where it's in focus, but this focus mapping is the same, but I feel like it is just a little bit better. Now, one of the great features that I really love when it comes to oversampled sensors is the ability to use clear image zoom. This is big because it's a 6K sensor downsampled to 4K, and if you use clear image zoom, it's going to be using a lot of those extra pixels and resolution to be giving you still a really nice crisp 4K image, but you can get that 1.5 times clear image zoom, which makes it obviously more reach. And that is extremely important if you do wildlife videography, sports videography, anything that you need that extra reach for, and you physically can't do it, obviously in camera, then you obviously have that in-camera ability to do so. It gives you a nice crisp 4K image that in post you can still crop in and still have really high resolution images. Now this one is interesting, get this right. It takes photos. It's a cinema camera that takes photos. Yes, the FX3 does take photos, and it is a mechanical and electronic shutter in the FX3, whereas the FX30 is just a complete electronic shutter. Now, I will dive into a completely separate video comparing the differences between mechanical and electronic. There are obviously disadvantages of having electronic over mechanical, but we're not going to be talking about that today, and it still takes stills, but it only takes stills in single shot. So you will have to press it each individual time. But if you're buying the FX30, you're buying it because it's a video camera first. It's not really meant to take photos. Like my FX6 does not take photos at all. It's a complete cinema camera, has no photo features. We're just lucky that the FX3 is a cinema camera and takes photos. That's great. But like I said, FX30 can only do single shot, but you still get 26 megapixel images, which is great. Now you do have two SD card or two type A cards in the side, just like the FX3. You've also got that MPF-Z battery. The top handle that comes with it attaches into it. That's amazing. And then you can have professional XLR inputs, which is phenomenal. You've got the zoom rocker on the front, all the customizable buttons, just like the FX3. It's pretty much identical body to the FX3. Now, one of the great things that I absolutely love about this is that you can record RAW externally to the Atomos Ninja V. Now that is great. Obviously there's going to be a firmware update for the Atomos to be able to handle that, but they've already had that agreement with Atomos, and you're going to be able to record RAW externally, which is phenomenal. Obviously the ability to change your white balance is a pretty big thing, and if you do mess up your white balance, it can make it very difficult when it comes to color grading. But these Sony cameras all have 10-bit internal, which is great. Now that leads me on to my next one is the codecs. So it's pretty much exactly the same codecs as the FX3. So you've got, your all-eye codecs, and you've got your HS, which is your compressed H.265 codecs. You've got just your regular 4K codecs. You've got all-eye with HD, and you can record up to 240 frames per second in 1080p, just like the FX3. Now, I guess one of the smallest disadvantages of the FX30 is that it is an APS-C size sensor. So you obviously have to account for that depth of field when it comes to full frame versus APS-C, and also low light situations. We'll dive directly into it in another video, but it's not as good when it comes to low light as the FX3. The FX3 is just an absolute beast when it comes to low light. Let's be real. And also, when it comes to low light and stuff, it does have less dynamic range than the FX3. Sony's rated it at 14 stops of dynamic range, whereas the FX3 has 15 stops of dynamic range. I'm sure Cine will do their complete dynamic range test and actually test how much stops you'll get out of this, but you know, it does seem to perform not as good as the A7 IV and the FX3 when it comes to low light, which, you know, is a big determining factor of how much, you know, dynamic range it actually has, because you're pretty much trying to capture as much in the highlights as possible and as much in the shadows as possible without bringing up too much of that noise floor. Now, I would assume that this would be Netflix approved because it has the ability to do timecode in, obviously with an adapter, which just like the FX3 has got now, and it is now Netflix approved. So the FX30 might be a fabulous camera for productions if you're going to be using it as a B cam on a car, on smaller gimbal rigs and all those kind of things. It could be a really good option to have in your kit. And I know for a fact that it's going to work extremely well in my workflow, and I am 100% going to be putting my money down towards this. As you pretty much watching this video right now, I've probably already ordered this thing. So I've already told Sony, I'm like, you need to put one on order for me because I'm absolutely going to be buying this. But that's pretty much the FX30 in a nutshell. Now I'm going to, like I said, be doing very specific low light performance, rolling shutter, image quality in other videos because there's just not enough time to cram it all into one video. I really need to dive deep and specific into these each in individual categories. So be sure to subscribe, watch out for the next videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, let's get it.